Is my timer ready? Is my camera ready?
Yes.
Imagine after a long day of working, all you want to do is grab some dinner and go home. You want to go to McDonald's for a Big Mac, but while you're waiting in line, you think to get a drink and fries as well. You get to the register, and it comes up to be $12. It says you don't make a lot of money. You wonder, do I really have to work almost 2 more hours just to afford dinner? Our team strongly supports the proposition to raise the United States federal minimum wage to a livable amount, so hardworking Americans don't have to wonder if they have enough money to pay for dinner. We believe minimum wage should be raised to around $50 gradually, then raised every year to match inflation. My first assertion is, the federal minimum wage should be increased yearly based on inflation. The United States federal minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. While at first glance you might think the minimum wage has been increasing over the years, when you adjust for inflation, it peaked in 1968 and has been stagnant ever since. Since the introduction of the federal minimum wage, legislation has been passed by Congress to increase it many times. From that alone, you might assume that our federal minimum wage has been keeping up with inflation and the growth of average wage. But when it is adjusted for inflation, a much different story is shown. The federal minimum wage peaked in 1968 at $9.90 an hour. Ever since then, it has been overall stagnant. This cannot be blamed on any economic situations, as the average wage has been healthily increasing. This issue is the result of not implementing any legislation on how to raise the minimum wage when the idea was first introduced. Most other countries raise their minimum wage yearly to match inflation or have a committee to determine next year's increase. This creates a slow, steady rise in minimum wages that matches inflation and doesn't give businesses much trouble. This is in stark contrast to America's system, passing legislation every couple of years. Every time the minimum wage is increased, inflation drags it back down. In addition to this, these sharp increases in minimum wage have had devastating effects on business as they are not prepared for them. My second assertion is, increasing the minimum wage is necessary for the well-being, health, and financial well-being of the average American family. Leaving the minimum wage at its current amount leaves many families below or dangerously near the poverty line. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Services, the poverty line for a household of 4 is an annual income of $25,750. The average annual income, assuming all ideal conditions, of a minimum wage worker is $15,080. If a household of 4 had 2 working members, they would be only $4,410 above the poverty line. In many states, this is not enough to live a comfortable life. It does not leave for a saving or as a safety net. If a working member of said household became unable to work because of illness or other means, the household would drop to $10,670 below the poverty line. If a working member left said family, the household would drop to $6,250 below the poverty line. This is all assumed that the working members of a household was able to work 40 hours a week. Oftentimes, only part-time is attainable. My third assertion is, higher minimum wages lead to decreased crime. Higher wages for lower income workers reduce crime by providing viable and sustainable employment, thus giving many people an alternative to theft. A livable wage also increases the overall quality of a person's life, giving them less of a reason to descend into a life of crime. According to an April 2016 study by the Executive Office of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, higher wages for low-income individuals reduce crime by providing viable and sustainable employment. Raising the minimum wage to $12 by 2020 would result in 3 to 5% crime decrease, and a societal benefit of $8 to $17 billion. A 2013 study found that living wage ordinances lead to modest reductions in expected robbery, burglary, larceny, and motor vehicle theft rates. Thank you.
He had like 2 slides with
Is the camera ready?
Yes.
Are my opponents ready? Is the timer ready? All right. Minimum wage is the lowest wage permitted by law or by special agreements such as one with the labor union. A living wage is a socially acceptable level of income that provides adequate coverage for basic necessities such as adequate food, shelter, child services, and health care. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. The federal government is raising it to $15 by 2025.
The $7.25 minimum is the minimum that can be paid to a minimum wage worker. However, some states have raised that, and the effects of that action have shown. My partner and I strongly negate the resolution that the U.S. should raise the overall federal minimum wage to a livable wage. So I heard my opponent say that the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation, but I don't really think that matters because the federal minimum wage was raised in the past and it led to a bunch of negative consequences. And even if the minimum wage was adjusted, other things such as merchandise and other products would have to raise to cover the cost of the minimum wage increase. So California has an unemployment rate of 4% and the minimum wage is $12. Oahu has an unemployment of 2.7% and the state minimum wage is $10.10. Washington, D.C. has an unemployment rate of 5.7% and has a minimum wage of $14. The rate of unemployment is a percentage that is calculated by dividing the number of unemployed individuals by the number of individuals currently employed in the workforce. So it doesn't really matter what the population is, and this shows us that having a higher minimum wage has a strong correlation with unemployment. This brings me to my first assertion. Raising the minimum wage would increase unemployment a lot. A Harvard study shows that 79% of economists believe that a minimum wage increases unemployment among young and unskilled workers. There is also a correlation between an increase in the minimum wage and an increase in the national unemployment rate. Since 1970, there have been 5 minimum wage increases. Unemployment rose dramatically immediately after 4 of those increases. Harvard University professor Greg McHugh wrote that according to various polls of the profession, 79% of economists subscribe to the following: a minimum wage increases unemployment among young and unskilled workers. Generally speaking, economists believe that a minimum wage leads to higher unemployment for unskilled workers. Some people might suggest that any type of correlation between the two are coincidental. It's not coincidental. Historical data suggests that there is a relationship between the two. Since 1970, Congress enacted 5 minimum wage increases. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, unemployment rose dramatically immediately after those 4 increases. In 1974, Congress enacted a minimum wage increase phased in over 3 years, 1974 to 1976. 1 month prior to the increase, national unemployment was at 5.1%. Thereafter, unemployment immediately began to rise, peaking at 9% just 13 months later. In 1978, Congress enacted another minimum wage increase, which phased in over 4 years. At the time of the first increase, unemployment was at 6.4%. When the final increase was implemented in 1981, unemployment was at 7.5% and increased to 10% by the end of the year. In 1990, unemployment was at 5.2%. Congress enacted yet another minimum wage increase. It happened. Unemployment steadily increased and peaked at 7.8%. In 1996, unemployment was at 5.2%. Congress enacted another increase and unemployment rose slightly to 5.4%, but declined slightly. What does this mean? This means that this is the only instance in the last 40 years in which the federal minimum wage increase was not followed by a really sharp increase in unemployment. Finally, in 2007, Congress enacted the latest increase phase in over 3 years, 2007 to 2009. After each of the 3 incremental increases, unemployment increased. The first increase on July 24, 2007, unemployment was at 4.8%. A month later, unemployment began moving upward. The next increase took effect in July 2008, when unemployment was at 5.8%. 6 months later, after the increase, unemployment was at 8.2%. In July 2009, unemployment was at 9.4%, and about 3 months after the increase, unemployment peaked at 10.8%.
I just got minimum wage.
I know. I'm literally on my hands.
Just show us some data.
Is the camera ready?
Yes.
Is my timer ready? Are the judges ready?
No.
No.
Thank you for asking, though.
Okay.
Okay, we're good. I'm good.
Our team supports that the resolution of the United States to raise the federal minimum wage to a livable wage and raise it every year to match inflation. My opponent said that increasing the minimum wage would decrease employment. We disagree with this position. Decades of research clearly conclude that modest increases in the minimum wage implemented slowly over time don't destroy jobs or job growth. A recent paper published by the National Bureau of Economic Research that examined job data over the period of 1979 to 2016 in 138 U.S. states and regions where minimum pay was increased. The study's conclusion that low-wage workers realized a pay gain of 7% after the minimum wage law was passed. However, there was no change in unemployment. Those who claim the minimum wage will destroy jobs are not supported by data. They have been successful in preventing an increase in federal minimum wage for a decade, for the detriment of nearly 2 million workers who are paid the current minimum wage or less. My opponent also asserts that the minimum wage would reduce hiring unskilled workers. We disagree with this position because the data on this point is not clear. An increase in minimum wage raises the income of those who are unemployed, but also raises the cost of hiring unskilled labor and can potentially reduce the number of people hired by businesses. So there are winners and losers from this policy. Those who remain unemployed receive higher incomes, they're better off, and those who would be employed if not for the increase in minimum wage would be worse off. However, one of the most cited research papers on this topic by the University of California, Berkeley, David Carr, and Princeton University, Alan Kruger, who was formerly head of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, finding that increasing the minimum wage did not have a significant effect on employment. Okay, my first assertion. A failure for the minimum wage contributes to an income and wealth inequality. Average wages have failed to keep up with the income of the top 1% of American workers, resulting in a growing wage inequality. As a result, minimum wage workers are not benefiting from the economic growth from the productivity of their labor and help produce. Just 30 years ago, the average pay gap between CEOs and workers was 59 to 1. Last year, it's 361 to 1. The average CEO makes $13,940,000, while a minimum wage worker makes $15,080, a gap of 924 to 1. My second assertion is that raising the federal minimum wage would save taxpayer money and reduce dependency on government programs. The U.S. government spends over $1 trillion a year on social welfare. When the employers don't pay enough people to survive, those workers are compelled to seek government assistance. The taxpayers are essentially subsidizing corporations who pay a basic livable wage. In 2016, an economic policy institute found that among recipients of public assistance, most were working or had family members who were working. They were concentrating on the bottom of the pay scale. Raising wages for low workers would reduce spending on public assistance, particularly among workers who are directly affected by minimum wage. My third assertion is raising the federal minimum wage would fuel economic growth. The roughly $120 billion in the wages and fees would be pumped back into the economy when necessity is rent, food, and clothing. Economists have long recognized that boosting purchasing power and putting back into the pocket for consumer spending have been positive on the effect of the entire economy. A research paper by the Washington Center of Ethical Growth on the overall economic benefit of income. Minimum wage for U.S. households found robust evidence that higher minimum wage leads to increases in income found along the bottom line distribution. These would reduce poverty rates. Thank you.
Okay, is my timer ready? Is the timer ready? Okay. My partner and I are against the resolution of that the U.S. should raise the overall federal minimum wage, the living wage. My first assertion is minimum wage is hurting everyone in the community. My reasoning is minimum wage as a whole puts stress on the economy, but mostly on small businesses. New and less experienced employees are pushing out employees with years of experience. My evidence is Ari Armstrong claims that a minimum wage forces employers to pay employees more than they may be worth, leading to fewer jobs for employees and higher prices for consumers. The higher prices are due to the employers needing more money to pay their current employees. Due to the rising prices, small businesses are suffering and closing down. Ari Armstrong also states, if the government forces employers to pay employees more than their work is worth to the employers, then the employers will either refrain from hiring the potential employees or fire those who don't provide value in excess to the legal minimum wage requirement. Thus, one consequence of minimum wage laws is that many people, particularly the young and inexperienced, end up out of work completely, and of course, are therefore unable to gain work experience to earn a higher wage in the future. My second assertion is, what would the economy look like if the minimum wage was lowered? My reasoning is increasing wage results in increased prices, which means an increase in cost of living that could essentially negate any advantage gained by workers having more dollars in their pockets. My evidence for this is the 2013 CBO report estimates that raising minimum wage to $10.10 an hour would result in the loss of approximately 500,000 jobs. One potential negative impact that is less readily apparent is that the possibility that a higher minimum wage will result in increased labor market competition for minimum wage jobs. The net outcome of an increased minimum wage might be a larger number of overqualified workers taking minimum wage positions that would originally go to younger and otherwise inexperienced workers. In the previous federal minimum wage increase from $5.50 to $7.25, only 15% of workers who were expected to gain from it lived in poor houses. And according to 2012 review by Mark Wilson, if the minimum wage today rose to $9.50, only 11% of workers would gain from poor housing. My third assertion is how raising the minimum wage ripples through the workforce. Minimum wage does not help certain people, but does help certain people. However, that effect waters down as it spreads from worker to worker. My evidence shows that although the minimum wage enhances the bargaining power of many low-wage workers, an increased minimum wage wages effectiveness is doing so dissipates as it spreads across the wage spectrum, essentially disappearing for middle-class wage earners. The economic theory suggests that increasing the minimum wage will raise the wages of other workers when employers need to compete for workers. My concluding sentence is, thus the minimum wage results in employers having less employees to pay or having to fire employees who don't benefit the company. Also, raising the minimum wage will only cause the cost of living to rise with it. Thank you.
Is the camera ready? My phone's ready? Is the camera ready? So, right now I'm going to review the best arguments made by my team. California's effort to raise the minimum wage to $15 has yielded negative consequences for workers, employers, and customers. An increase in the minimum wage increased unemployment, increased the number of poor families, and California raised the minimum wage by 15% today. Jobs will be eliminated and workers will lose them. And employers will have to pay inexperienced workers really high rates. The evidence for these for our arguments are increases in the minimum wage actually would redistribute among poor families by giving some higher wages and putting others out of work. A 1997 National Bureau of Economic Research study estimated that the federal minimum wage hike of 1996 and 1997 actually increased the number of poor families by 4.5%. A 2012 analysis of the New York State minimum wage increase from $5 to $6.75 per hour found a 20.2 to 21% reduction in the employment of the younger, less educated individuals. A 2010 analysis by Michael J. Hicks found the latest round of minimum wage increases account for roughly 550,000 fewer part-time jobs, including roughly 310,000 fewer teenagers working part-time. In 2010, Joseph Sabia and Richard Berghauser estimated that nearly 1.3 million jobs will be lost if the federal minimum wage is increased to $9.50 an hour. An increased federal minimum wage from $5.15 to $7.25, only 15% of workers who are expected to gain from it live in poor households. And also, the law of demand says that at a higher price, less is demanded, and it applies to cars, movie tickets, and even labor. Because a legislative increase in the price, of labor does not increase workers' productivity, some workers will lose their jobs, and the ones who do are least productive. So I'm going to talk about the probability of our resolution, which is to lower the federal minimum wage. The probability of passing. The probability of the federal minimum wage being decreased is really slim, almost next to none. Because the federal minimum wage is set to rise to a full $15 by 2024 or 2025. However, the federal minimum wage is still $7.25. So the federal minimum wage might stay the same for a while, but I don't think it will decrease. The probability of unemployment rates rising is really high. The one reason why it's not totally 100% confirmed is because it did not rise immediately after a minimum wage increase in 1998. Don't get me wrong, unemployment still rose but didn't rise as fast as it did. Decreasing the minimum wage would have an immediate and long-term effect. Since raising the minimum wage in the past caused unemployment rates to rise at a fast rate, decreasing it would reduce unemployment and increase job opportunities. Decreasing the federal minimum wage would pay less towards unskilled workers, but would help increase pay towards high-skilled workers and productive ones. Since increasing the minimum wage caused teenagers to drop out, decreasing it would encourage them to stay in school. Therefore, raising it would have a negative, long, and immediate effect, while decreasing it would have a long, immediate, while maintaining a positive effect. My partner and I believe that the minimum wage should not be raised because when it was in the past, it caused unemployment, encouraged teenagers to drop out of school, reduced job opportunities, and it will cause the price of merchandise and other products to rise because of the increased labor costs. And it even caused a few businesses to shut down in the past in California, which is why we should lower the federal minimum wage. Thank you.
So it's just that didn't cover for you on the one. No one on the team refused. Yeah, no one on their team refused. Well, Jaydon did what?
Time already. I'd like to refute my opponent's statement that raising the federal minimum wage would lower job availability and push out workers from their job, because according to the Economic Policy Institute, a reputable nonprofit that carries out economic research, it is estimated that if we increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024, about 40 million workers would see a significant pay boost as a result. An increased wage would benefit the vast majority of low-wage workers. According to Economics Help, when the UK rose their minimum wage between 2010 and 2017, their employment rate didn't rise. In fact, it actually continued downwards to 12.5%. I'd also like to refute my opponent's statement that raising the federal minimum wage would increase the price of goods. Because according to a study done by Dr. Sarah Lamone's lecturer at the University of Economics, prices do not rise a zero amount when minimum wage is increased. In her research, she found a 10% increase in minimum wage led to a 0.4% increase in prices. In our proposed solution, the minimum wage would be increased by 107%, which would only lead to an estimated price increase of 4%. Even though prices would rise, the raised wage would easily offset this. And regardless of whether or not you believe my opponent's claims of the negative effects of raising the federal minimum wage, our proposed increase is gradual. The gradual increase of wage reduces the shock and would negate most of the proposed economic downsides. During this debate, you have heard many arguments both for and against raising the federal minimum wage, but it all comes down to two key arguments. The first one being that millions of families are left below the poverty line. It is defined as the threshold of income needed to secure the necessities of life. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, the poverty line for a household of four is an annual income of $25,750. While two minimum wage workers would make enough to keep their household above the poverty line in ideal situations, such conditions are not always plausible. The second is the idea that raising the federal minimum wage will actually decrease taxes. Whether or not you care about people in poverty, this one applies to you. As my partner said, companies that pay minimum wage actually encourage their workers to seek assistance through government welfare programs rather than help them themselves. For many, these programs are their only hope. What's the result of this? Well, according to the United States Census Bureau, over 21% of the American population is a part of at least one means-tested government assistance program. This ends up costing the government over $1 trillion taxpayer dollars each year. These arguments are crucial because they affect a huge amount of people. According to the United States Census Bureau, 38.1 million people are below the poverty line. That's 1 in every 8 Americans. These families have trouble finding places to live, clothes to wear, and food to eat. How can we be okay with this? Every American citizen pays taxes. This means that every person is responsible for supplementing the wages of minimum wage workers. We have to make up for the greedy companies' slack. Why should we be responsible for this duty? Shouldn't companies just pay them a livable wage? If things stay the way they are, it's likely that the federal minimum wage will continue to stay stagnant at $7.25 an hour. Our currency will continue at steady inflation, slowly but surely reducing the purchasing power of that $7.25 wage. Millions of families will be driven further into poverty. But if our country were to pass legislation to raise the minimum wage and then have an increase with inflation, all of this could be avoided. The lives of millions of Americans could be improved. This is both an immediate problem and one that will affect us long into the future. How we address federal minimum wage now will immediately affect the millions of American lives. Delaying action will just prolong the problem, suffering, and poverty. To conclude, America should raise its federal minimum wage to a livable amount. Our team proposes to create legislation to gradually raise the minimum wage, then raise the wage yearly to keep up with inflation. This would result in a minimum wage with constant buying power for decades to come without hurting businesses. Raising the wage is likely to free up money in our government's budget, leading the way to tax cuts or improvements in government services. It will also change millions of lives for the better by keeping people above the poverty line. There aren't any proven negative effects, so why wouldn't we raise the federal minimum wage?